History of Imperial Sugar Company by Carol Beecham. The Imperial Sugar Company has a long and interesting history. It is one of the oldest continuously operating businesses in the state of Texas. This presentation is a look back at its humble beginnings and all of the changes that occurred over the decades. The original plant was closed down years ago, but it left an enduring legacy for the city of Sugar Land. Most of the information for this presentation was taken from the book Sugar Land, Texas and the Imperial Sugar Company by R.M. Armstrong. Check this book out for a much more detailed account of the Imperial Sugar Company's history. It is available within the Fort Bend County Library System. Samuel May Williams first came to Texas to serve as secretary to Stephen F. Austin in 1822. His job was to write deeds and certificates of title by hand in Spanish. On April 11, 1828, Stephen F. Austin gave Williams one of his leagues of land as a reward for his services. This is where the city of Sugar Land is located today. Samuel transferred ownership of the property to his brother Nathaniel, but he let his younger brother Matthew manage it. In 1840, Matthew planted sugar cane and constructed horse-drawn mills that were used to grind it to make syrup. The property was known as the Oakland Plantation. In 1843, the Williams family built a large commercial sugar mill, which became the birthplace of the Imperial Sugar Company. The image is of sugarcane being planted on a Louisiana plantation, but it would have looked similar in Texas. The Williams sold Oakland Plantation to Benjamin F. Terry and William Kyle after the death of Matthew Williams in 1852. After purchasing it, they changed the name to the Sugar Land Plantation. Under Kyle and Terry's ownership, the Sugar Land Plantation continued to grow and became the largest plantation in Texas, which consisted of 12,500 acres. They enlarged the sugar mill and were credited with bringing the first railroad of Texas through Sugar Land right near the raw sugar mill. The railroad was the 30-mile Buffalo Bayou, Brazos, and Colorado Railway going from Harrisburg to Richmond. The railroad made it very convenient for Kyle and Terry to ship their product. Kyle and Terry soon became very wealthy men, and Terry's plantation became known as the hubbub for social activity in the area. Terry's life was cut short during the Civil War when he was killed in battle near Bowling Green, Kentucky in 1861. He was only 40 years old. Terry was a colonel in the Confederacy and commanded a regiment known as Terry's Texas Rangers. Kyle soon died as well in 1864, and the plantation was given to their heirs. During and after the Civil War, plantations in the area became badly run down because there was no labor force to run them. Kyle and Terry's heirs were unable to rebuild it and began selling sections of the plantation to Colonel Edward H. Cunningham in 1882. Cunningham was a wealthy farmer and rancher from San Antonio and wanted to invest in sugar plantations in Fort Bend County. Previously, he had partnered up with Colonel Littleberry Ellis, who owned 5,300 acres known as the Sartasha Plantation. They grouped their plantations together and invested a lot of money into making improvements, including building a new sugar mill, which they called the Imperial Mill. Their partnership dissolved a year later, with Cunningham keeping the original mill and 12,500 acres of the land. He continued to increase his land holdings and make improvements. By 1890, it was considered to be the best sugar refinery in all the South. Working on a sugar plantation and refinery was hard work, which is why Cunningham used convict labor as a cheap labor force. No citizens would stay working there for very long. At the time, black men were being put in prisons for minor offenses or possibly even trumped-up charges. There was a loophole in the 13th Amendment that stated, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the U.S." In 1879, Cunningham leased convicts for 5 years from the state of Texas to work on his land or sublease to other plantations. Over half the convicts in the system were being used in Fort Bend and Brazoria counties. In the late 1800s, the Sugar Land countryside was described as a low mosquito-infested swamp, and the sluggish bayous were habitats for alligators and noisome creepers. Convicts dropped like flies when fever epidemics would break out amongst them. They worked bare-legged in the wet sugarcane fields. The area became known as the Hell Hole on the Brazos. In 1886, the state took over the leasing function. Cunningham's plantation had the largest convict population in the state. The lease system used by the state was abandoned in 1936. They started buying their own land for the prisoners to work, which established the state penal institution in Sugar Land. By 1902, Cunningham's health had begun to fail and he was going into debt. The company changed hands in 1908 when William T. Eldridge and Isaac H. Kipner bought the company and Sugar Land properties. They named it the Imperial Sugar Company after the Ellis Ross sugar mill that had been known as the Imperial Mill. Kipner liked the name and the image it conveyed. It was a fitting name for a company that went on to become one of the best in the United States. However, they first had to clean up the area's image as the Hell Hole on the Brazos. Kipner, who was against the use of convict labor, wanted to move to civilian labor, but he needed a way to make it an attractive place to work and live. Therefore, with Eldridge acting as general manager, they began to turn it into a company town. Construction began on building employee housing. These homes that were built between 1908 and 1930 weren't fancy, but were built to last. There were company personnel who maintained all of the company homes. Their job was to make any repairs needed on the housing. The neighborhood was a source of pride for the community. These houses were built within walking distance to the plant. The streets were paved, curbed, and guttered. The town was only a mile long from one end to the other. Stores were built within walking distance as well. The Imperial Mercantile Company was supposedly the largest general store between Houston and San Antonio. There was plenty of service businesses, including a lumberyard and hardware store, meat and vegetable markets, a bakery, restaurant, barber shop, hotel, and shoe repair shop. The townspeople had access to medical care, education for their children, and a pharmacy. There were also churches, a bank, and a post office. Even though the town was isolated, it was quite self-sufficient, so there wasn't a need to travel anywhere to get supplies. The company town did not raise the prices of goods in their stores to make a profit, even though it was hard for people to buy elsewhere. Since the town was isolated by poor road conditions, it was difficult to shop in the surrounding towns. Prices were the same as the Houston stores. Profits were transferred from the profitable to the unprofitable stores and services to keep all businesses afloat. Extra monies were shifted around where most needed. Even the farm income could be sent to help out the stores. The town wasn't set up to make a profit on its stores, homes, and service businesses. It was just there to make life easier for the employees of the sugar and farming industries. Eldridge and Kipner wanted to attract good people to work for them. Credit was given to every occupant of a household. Tenants were allowed to charge everything to their monthly account, including rent, utilities, groceries, medication, fuel, and even purchases made at the general store. Everyone paid their bills in order to keep their jobs. Special consideration was made for those who were unable to pay with unusual circumstances. Coupon books and aluminum coins were made available to the employees to spend in the company stores if they wished. Kipner and Eldridge did everything they could to make life comfortable for their loyal employees. Traffic was crazy on Saturdays. Farmers and farm workers came from all around to do their shopping in the area. Traffic jams with horses, buggies, and wagons were worse during cotton season. A total of 400 homes had been built by 1917 that was occupied by a population of 1,200 people. A new school was completed in 1918 that was located on the north bank of Cleveland Lake. It was a large complex with 11 buildings on it arranged in a semicircle with a large auditorium at the center. Each building had a classroom and a bathroom and were heated by a central system during the winter. Large windows cooled the air during the warmer months. The buildings were connected by covered walkways that were paved. The auditorium could also be used for civic meetings and gatherings which had the capacity to hold 500 people. Occasionally, the community could go there to watch silent movies. This was during the time of segregation, so minorities had their own schools and housing that weren't as nice as the ones in the photos. The school system, maintenance, and salaries of the teachers was paid for solely by Kempner and Eldridge at the time. The school system was reported to have cost $100,000 to build. It was built larger than they needed at the time because they expected the younger population to grow. The graduating class in 1919 consisted of only one student. Medical care was the next thing that Kempner and Eldridge wanted to improve upon. They constructed a state-of-the-art modern hospital at the corner of Wood and Lakeview in 1922. The hospital cost $15,000 to build at the time. It was named the Laura Eldridge Memorial Hospital after Eldridge's second wife, who had died after only a few months of marriage. After the hospital was built, employees of the various Sugar Land businesses could receive complete medical care for $1.50 per month that was automatically deducted from their pay. This included surgeries, doctor visits, prescriptions, eyeglasses, artificial limbs, and even 1 year of hospital confinement. Family members of the employees were treated at a reasonable cost. Those who lived and worked outside of the community were charged standard prices. The hospital also engaged in lots of charitable work. In 1909, the Thatcher Plantation House was moved to Sugar Land to serve as a hotel and boarding house. It was a pre-Civil War home that was a large building. Numerous rooms and facilities were added, including a dance floor and dining room. It was called the Imperial Inn. Deliveries such as dairy and ice were made as needed. There was also a daily garbage pickup service at the back door by a man driving a mule-drawn wagon. The Imperial Inn was in business until 1946, when it was destroyed by fire. Eldridge was appointed general manager of the Imperial Sugar Company in 1909 and entered into a 3-year contract. He had the large Ellis plantation home moved into the refinery yard. A whistle blew every day at 6 a.m., noon, 1 p.m., and 6 p.m. to indicate the shift changes in the noon hour. The refinery operated on 2 12-hour shifts in those early days. The steam whistle was also used to announce fires and to alert the firemen. A different number of blasts was used to indicate which part of town the fire was located at. Fire was a constant threat with the use of wood, coal, and kerosene stoves. Water mains and fire hydrants weren't installed in the town until 1918. From 1906 to 1924, Kempner and Eldridge invested their earnings on making improvements and enlarging the refinery, increasing productivity on their farms and growing their businesses. Eldridge kept his eye on the whole enterprise and was very interested in all aspects of the business. In the beginning, there were 2 sugar companies operating, which were Imperial Sugar and Cunningham Sugar Company. In 1918, these 2 merged and became known as the Imperial Sugar Company. By 1919, all the various businesses, including Imperial Sugar, were owned and operated under Sugar Land Industries. By the 1920s, it had become a small-town conglomerate. It was very successful with all of its businesses and applied goods and services to the town. Imperial Sugar quickly became a profitable and growing business. It became the backbone for Sugarland Industries by becoming the biggest employer and generating the cash flow to keep all the other businesses profitable. It was the only sugarcane refinery between Louisiana and San Francisco. Because of an increase in population, the demand for sugar began to go up. During this time, raw sugar production was on the decline due to infestations of sugar crops in Louisiana and Texas and cheaper availability from foreign shores. Once sugarcane began to be imported from Cuba, they were able to meet the demand by operating on a year-round basis. Over time, Imperial Sugar began to process less and less domestically grown sugarcane at its mill and refinery. 1928 was the last year that locally grown sugarcane was processed at Sugarland. The Imperial Sugar Company was doing very well until the Depression hit. The 1930s was a turbulent time for the company. During this time, sales of refined sugar decreased and competition increased. Also, prices for farm crops fell. In 1931, the company suffered its first loss in a decade. Sugarland Industries had to get a loan from the Imperial Sugar Company when one of its businesses, the Texas Fig Company, went belly up. A second year of losses caused the Imperial Sugar Company to be at risk as well. Both Imperial and Sugarland Industries were steps away from going into receivership until Kempner was able to secure a loan for $1.2 million from several banks. The loan helped, but there was still trouble. There were 3-day work weeks, and at times they would shut down for 2 weeks. Salaries and wages were also reduced, but they tried to give each hourly employee enough work to pay rent and buy food. When there wasn't enough work for the men at the Imperial Sugar Company, they would have them work on the farms. If you were truly in need, leniencies were made for those employees who were unable to pay their bills. Employees continued to receive complete medical care during this time. Things got further complicated when in 1932, Eldridge died at the age of 69. Which placed an even greater burden on the Kempner family. Earnings from Sugarland Industries were very little, if any. Some of the retail and service businesses operated at a loss, which was subsidized by those which were making a profit. The farming operations had both good and bad years. Sugarland Industries began selling off sections of land to help make ends meet. At the end of the decade, they retained 11,000 acres of the original 18,000 they purchased from Ellis and Cunningham. By 1938, Sugarland Industries found itself in financial trouble again and were unable to make payments on their loans. However, Kempner was able to work another refinancing program. Also in 1938, a union was formed in Sugarland called the United Sugar Workers Local Union No. 917. Of the Congress for the United Organizations. By September of 1941, both companies were back in good standing with the financial community. As World War II got underway, the American public became concerned over a possible shortage of sugar and began hoarding it. Sugar rationing soon began by the issuing of coupons and certificates to all users. Practically everyone in the U.S. had to register as well as any business using or dealing in sugar. Quotas under the Sugar Act were suspended and limitations were lifted on production of beet and cane sugar farms in the U.S. when raw sugar cane became harder to transport overseas due to the war. There were also zoning regulations which were placed on U.S. sugar refineries because of a shortage of railroad cars. This made Imperial Sugar the only supplier for most of the state of Texas. It was also able to ship to Oklahoma, but could not ship outside of these territories. The good thing about this was that the Imperial Sugar brand was the only one available on the Texas market. In 1942, Imperial Sugar converted from using cotton bags to paper ones. Cotton was in high demand for military supplies, and paper was less expensive and easier to work with during a labor shortage. Women, ex-convicts, and transients were employed during this time. The employees were working between 12 to 16 hours a day. The plant would run for 6 consecutive weeks at 7 days a week or until it had to be shut down for repairs. Maintenance was only done on an emergency basis. This went on until 1947 because sugar was being produced for many Allied countries who weren't able to produce it themselves. The continuous running of the plant took its toll on the machinery and buildings. Sugar Land Industries also had a shortage of employees to work in the stores and farms. Even under these circumstances, the company still managed to keep everyone in the town fed and serviced. With the price of cotton rising from the low prices of the 1930s, the company was able to be profitable again. At the end of the war, all of the veterans came home and resumed working where they had before. Everything returned to normal and the labor shortage was over. Big changes took place after the war when the Kempners bought out the Eldridge heirs for $2.5 million in cash on May 11, 1946. The refinery was in bad shape and the properties were run down. It was going to take a great deal of money to fix it up, and the Eldridge heirs weren't interested. The Kempners were in charge for over 40 years under the leadership of I.H. Kempner, his 2 sons Herbert and Harris, and Herbert's 2 sons Denny and James. They owned almost everything in Sugar Land, including 11,000 acres surrounding the town. Shortly after the buyout, Herbert Kempner implemented a plan to completely redo the refinery plant after years of neglect from the war. With the new improvements, the Imperial Sugar Company became a modern and much more efficient sugarcane refinery. The rebuilding program took almost 6 years to complete and cost over $4 million. In order to increase business, good customer service was practiced and heavy advertising was done in the local newspapers and radio stations. Imperial Sugar was the only sugar refinery in the state, which is where the brand was promoted the heaviest. They were manufacturing a complete line of grocery packages, including granulated, brown, and powdered sugars. Shipments were done by rail. Even liquid and bulk sugars were delivered to industrial food processors. Under the Kempner ownership, the Imperial Sugar Company was very prosperous, as well as Sugar Land Industries. By 1949, the town was once again thriving. By 1950, Imperial Sugar was the largest supplier of refined sugar. They had the largest share of the market, especially in Texas. They were doing so well that their sales increased to the point of exceeding the plant's capacity to produce. They were producing 2.8 million pounds a day. To increase their output, they went to 3-hour shifts a day, which required an additional 100 workers. There wasn't enough housing for these new employees, so Kempner made property ownership in the town available for the employees to build new homes on. This move opened up the company homes for the new hires. Sugar Land had a reputation as being a good place to live and raise a family, so they had no trouble attracting new workers. Next, the Kempners turned their attention to building a new and modern shopping center. It was to be the first one of its kind in Fort Bend County. The new center was to be housed in a 2-story brick and glass building on the south side of Highway 90. The upper story was to be used for new office space for both the Imperial Sugar Company and Sugar Land Industries. A number of services were also available on the bottom floor. The new center opened in 1952. Lots of changes were coming to Sugar Land, which would be the beginning of the end for the company town. Herbert Kempner died on October 20, 1953, but before his death he wrote detailed instructions about how to run the 2 companies, which led to their continued success in many years to come. More improvements were to come as the area began to grow. With the building of the Southwest Freeway from Houston, Sugar Land Industries formed the Belknap Corporation and began the development of several subdivisions around the outskirts of town. More people began moving to Sugar Land. The town was no longer populated exclusively by Imperial Sugar or Sugarland Industries. In the 1950s, a new facility was built in Galveston to be able to receive raw sugar in bulk form rather than in 300-pound bags. To accommodate the new bulk shipments from Galveston, Imperial had to also construct an identical handling and warehousing system at the refinery in Sugarland. The two systems represented a cost of some $3 million, but brought the company into the modern world of more efficient handling of its raw material. A new plant in Arlington was also built to better service their liquid sugar customers in North Texas. To keep from possibly being annexed by Houston, Imperial Sugar and Sugarland Industries petitioned the state for a city charter in 1958, which was granted in 1959. Elections for a mayor, 5 city councilmen, and a planning commission soon followed. This began the slow progress of Sugarland moving from a company town to a chartered city government. The Imperial Sugar Company began selling their company houses to the employees who were living in them, while Sugarland Industries decided to keep renting theirs. Sugarland Industries also kept their various businesses open and continued their farming, cattle, and real estate activities. In the beginning, the Imperial Sugar Company would help the city by advancing funds when needed and relinquished control of city services. Employees now had to start paying taxes to the city, county, and school district. Big changes were on the horizon. Continued growth continued into the 70s until the old retail stores in Sugarland could no longer compete with the new modern shopping centers and service businesses springing up. In 1972, the Kipner family decided to completely liquidate Sugarland Industries within 12 months. All of the businesses they owned were either sold or closed during this time. However, they went about this in a compassionate manner and helped their former employees get new jobs elsewhere, either with the sugar company or someplace else. They also put up the remaining land, which amounted to 7,500 acres, up for bids. The land sold for $43 million to Gerald Hines Interest and included the shopping center. It was one of the largest land sales in Texas history during that time. Hines formed a company to start developing the land. Thus began the huge building boom in the area. Imperial continued to dominate the market in the 1980s in the Southwest. Annual sales had risen to $10 million, but they wanted to go bigger. In 1988, the Imperial Sugar Company merged with the Holly Sugar Corporation under the leadership of Denny Kipner and President R.C. Hanna. They became the Imperial Holly Corporation, combining their cane sugar refineries with Holly's 8 beet processing plants located in the western U.S. It became one of the largest producers and marketers of refined sugar in the nation. After the merger, the company became publicly traded for the first time. Its annual income rose to $717 million in 1990, but then things started to decline in subsequent years. The company continued to have trouble in the mid-1990s, such as depressed prices for refined sugar and losses from adverse weather and disease in their beet crops. In the late 1990s, the company continued to expand by buying up other companies in the sugar industry around the country. After acquiring all of these new companies, the company went back to its original name, the Imperial Sugar Company. Then, on January 17, 2001, the company filed for bankruptcy because of lower sales for refined sugar and raising energy costs. 8 months later, the company emerged from bankruptcy and started downsizing its operations. Sadly, the original plant in Sugarland was closed in 2003, but their corporate headquarters are still located in Sugarland. The closing of the Sugarland plant was an end of an era. You can still visit the site of the original plant. A few of the buildings still remain and have been opened up for other development. The former container warehouse building now houses the Sugar Land Heritage Museum, where you can learn even more about Sugar Land history. This is Carol Beecham. Thanks for watching.